Hey everyone, today I'm joined with Shar Broumand, who's the CEO of Infinity and also Zero Hiring. And you've got massive history in the venture space. You've been part of some massive IPOs and exits, and you've built a lot. And you're also an immigrant, right?
Absolutely. I'm what I call a triple immigrant.
A triple immigrant. Okay,
Yeah.
so take us back. Like what's the original founding story?
Yeah. Let me just clarify real quick though. I'm a general partner and founder of Infinity, not the CEO. My CEO is a fantastic partner and chief executive. I don't want to steal his title here. I'm CEO of Zero Hiring and general partner and co-founder of Infinity Constellation, which is an AI native holdco that we're building.
Mhm.
Going back, as I said, I'm a triple immigrant. I was 6 years old when my family decided to leave Iran when the revolution happened in 1978, and we moved to London, England first. Spent about 4 years there, so that was my first kind of immigrant experience. Then we moved to Brussels, Belgium, when I was 10 years old, and I went to school there. I grew up in an American school, played football, homecoming, prom. It was very much an American upbringing, but overseas. And so that was my second immigrant move. And then fast forward to 2012, I'm sorry, 2005, I moved to the United States permanently, and I became a citizen in 2012. So that's why I consider myself a triple immigrant. Background wise, let's see, I went to school in California. Loyola Marymount University in California is where I did 2 years of my undergrad. And then I switched and went back to Europe and kind of finished off my degree, my bachelor's and my MBA at a Swiss school, European university. Spent the first part of my career, if you like, working across Europe. I lived and worked in Luxembourg, Brussels, Paris, London, Hamburg. Kind of moved around, different jobs, different roles, mainly on the consulting side. In those days, this is pre-internet, pre-email. I'm kind of dating myself, but pre-internet and the two kind of paths that you took if you came out of business school and were very, very ambitious were either investment banking or consulting. So I took the consulting route and spent a number of years learning how to sell complex consulting solutions to diverse companies across diverse industries, everything from automotive to banking, to heavy machinery. Just a fantastic experience early on that formed my thinking around what it takes to run, build successful businesses. And then by the mid '90s, the internet was starting to become a thing in the US more so than in Europe where I was based. But I was starting to kind of see the writing on the wall for myself. I was in my early 20s. The EU, the European Union, was a concept that was becoming reality in a few years from then. Common market, common currency. In those days, we had every country had their own rules and regulations, their own currency. Doing business across European countries, which is what we did in the consulting business, was complex and hard, right? Everything was just hard. And what I realized is that as the EU forms and it becomes one common region, one economic region, you still had this like massive differences in culture, language, and honestly, not everybody, not the entire populations across these countries were bought into this vision of a united Europe. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, I'm in my early 20s. This project, this experiment, whatever you want to call it, is going to take, man, like 30 to 50 years for it to like really take hold, right? Assuming it's going to be successful. And as a result, someone of my age where I'm at, I'm going to be collateral damage, right? I'm not going to evolve. I'm an immigrant in the heart of Europe. And as Europe figures out what it wants to do, who it wants to be, and where it goes, I just didn't see the opportunities for immigrants like myself. And so at that point, it was one of those aha moments where in the mid 90s, I just realized my future is in the US, but I didn't really know why. My calling, I still didn't understand what my calling was. I was doing really well in consulting. I was learning, getting a lot of experience. I was paid well for my age. And yet, America called me. And so I started researching a little bit, moving to the US, what that would be like. I obviously spent some time in Los Angeles in college. Culturally, I felt a lot more American than I did European. But you got to do a little research. What does it take to move? And eventually, I realized that the reason why I wanted to come to the U.S. is it really comes down to the individual opportunities, the individual rights, and the ridiculous amount of liberty that you have as an individual in this country. Like, I studied that, went through the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, obviously talked to a lot of Americans in my network about, what it was like to grow up and start businesses and lives. And, people from all walks of life. I talked to everything from entrepreneurs to government workers that I knew personally, and just getting their take on what it is to not just live in the United States, but to be an American, right? What does that mean? And there was a colleague that I worked with in the consulting business. He was based out of the U.S. and he was over one time. He put it best. One of my fellow Belgian colleagues was giving him a hard time about, America and America this and America that. And then finally, he says to him, I mean, what is an American? The guy's name was Tim. He says, Tim, what is an American? I mean, you guys were all immigrants. You guys all come from, Europe and other places. So, what really is an American? And Tim, he was puffing on a cigar, just looked at him for like 30 seconds, seemed like it was an hour, right? Just stared at him and says, you want to know what an American is? Look in the mirror. That's an American. And it was just one of the best lines I've ever heard. So I started to look at opportunities in the U.S. I didn't have my papers. I didn't have a green card. I had no company that was willing to move me over on a visa. I just went out and started talking to different headhunting groups and recruiters, and they all kind of said to me, you should look at American companies and maybe getting employment over there with a U.S. firm, and then find your way to the U.S. through them, right? And eventually, that's what ended up happening. Is I stumbled onto a tech startup out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a company by the name of Free Markets, and I interviewed with these guys, and I honestly went into it very low expectations, almost a little bit arrogant, like, I don't know what these guys do. I don't understand this, internet business they have, but it's just good practice for me. Let me go and kind of interview, make some connections, see where it goes. Very arrogant, my young self. And they blew me away. 8 hours of interviews. The founding team had flown in from the U.S. to do the recruiting. Startups can't get recruiting wrong, and they were just starting this small outpost in Brussels for their one and only flagship client, right? So I go through 8 hours of just I'm getting hammered in these interviews. I mean, these people are smart. They're so enthusiastic about what they do. Their excitement was contagious, right? But at the end of 8 hours, I couldn't tell you what the hell they did because it was from such a different world than I came from. I was primarily in marketing and distribution channel consulting, and these guys had created technology to change the procurement and sourcing world, right? Which I knew nothing about. And so at the end of those 8 hours, I came out of it thinking, I have no idea what fucking sport these guys play, but I want to join their team. Like I'm happy to carry the water. Like, these guys are really something special. And again, not understanding one bit what they do, right? Because I didn't come from that world. Long story short is I got an offer. It took a few months, but I got an offer and I took it. and it was, it was not a great offer as far as like leaving my cushy consulting job with a big title and everything that I had, right, at a young age. But boy, was it just amazing, and it was also the moment that I really became an entrepreneur versus an employee mindset, because they offered me, a small salary, but they offered me equity, and especially for somebody in Europe and Belgium. I mean, nobody offered you equity. You didn't. That was like something that was never heard of. And these guys put some options on the table, and I couldn't believe my luck. I was like, all right, I'm in, and my mindset from that moment on was an owner's mindset. I remember being, the last out and switching off the lights every night to make sure we didn't burn electricity, right? That kind of mentality. So that's how I got into this entrepreneurial startup game. And then eventually we built Free Markets. We went from, a struggling startup to having a real business. I was part of the early European team, so I was in fairly early, but the business was being built in the U.S. while we were serving some American customers in Europe at the early days. We built a real business, and in December of 1999, we IPO'd. We broke a bunch of NASDAQ records at the time. I think we were the second or third largest IPO in NASDAQ history at the time. We were all paper millionaires. But as you know, that was, December of 1990, December 10th of 1999. By March of 2000, the bubble burst and the markets crashed. And so we went from being paper millionaires to still ahead, still doing well. But, by the time our 6 month lockup was
Mm.
over, most of us, the majority of us, had no intent or interest to sell our stock at this lower level, which was still, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the earliest we could sell was 3x what our 2 or 3x what our IPO price was. So we would have all, we were ahead. But I just remember like thinking to myself, look, we got a lot of work to do. We're building. The opportunity is amazing ahead of us. Let me just forget about this equity and just keep working. And that's what I did. I put my head down, and a lot of my colleagues did that as well. And we built Free Markets into a really successful business, a successful story coming out of the internet bubble. We basically grew our business to $250 million in sales, and then sold ourselves to our main competitor, a company called Ariba out of Sunnyvale, California. We'd been competing, like violently competing for a couple of years. They were a software tech company, very good at that part of the equation. We were more a tech-enabled services company, which in those days was really
Mm.
frowned upon as opposed to today. But we had the services piece. We had this amazing operations team that had built up, world-class capability. And the technology that we used was just to empower them achieving outcomes for our customers, which today in this AI world is exactly where everything's going. But back in those days, Wall Street didn't like it very much. So Ariba acquired us, and I continued with the company, and it was Ariba that offered me the opportunity to move to the U.S. And so I relocated to the United States in 2004, 2005. It was February of 2005. Set up shop here, and put myself on the path to citizenship, and also to what I did next. So that's kind of the early days, how I got here. That's the
What
story.
what were those conversations like where you're discussing with your team to even IPO? Because at least the environment today is we want to delay valuation as much as possible. We want to space out the timing between rounds. What was it like then?
Yeah. In those days, it was obviously I can't go back too much before the late 90s. I wasn't old enough. I wasn't in the game, but it felt to me like we were going through this unique period where the internet had made way for these new businesses, right? So if you think about like Amazon. Amazon is an internet native business versus, say, Walmart is not an internet native business. They were a brick and mortar traditional business that, initially didn't even latch onto the internet. And then when it did, it was trying to integrate the internet into its existing business model. Whereas Amazon was built as a native online business, right? And so, for at least by my math, for 20 years, Amazon ran circles around Walmart and the rest of the competitors in the retail world, until they've woken up and they've kind of restructured everything around being native online businesses. We're going through that with AI right now, right? So you've got, on the one hand, traditional companies that are trying to integrate AI into their existing processes, structures, the way their people work. It's incredibly difficult. It doesn't work. It's actually, there's not, and the effort to make it work is almost not worth it, right? So that's what's going on today versus AI native businesses, right? That are creating themselves right off the bat as AI native AI businesses that are
Mm.
built on that technology. The company that I CEO, Zero Hiring, does exactly that. We are building the leading AI process platform for recruitment, right? For all things recruitment. So we help companies that have high volume recruitment needs. And I'm not talking about headhunting and going after like a CEO or a CFO. The headhunting business is very different. I'm talking about companies that hire hundreds and hundreds of people a month for
Yeah.
their business, whether it's salespeople, whether it's customer service people, whether it's like warehouse and distribution people. Think about like retailers that need tons and tons of workers across their footprint, or like fast food chains, your Wendy's, your McDonald's. They're always recruiting, right? That's what we do, but we have built our entire process around our AI process platform. And so we've taken a bunch of experts, bunch of people that have expertise and experience in recruitment, and we've basically empowered them with the right AI technology and the right processes to deliver faster, better, cheaper outcomes. And what we deliver is an outcome. You're not paying us a fee. You're not paying us monthly. You're not paying us, hourly. Um, you are paying us for an outcome. We have a customer right now who needs, across one region of their business, they need 10 roles filled a week, every week, 52 weeks a year, right? That's what we do. And we do it again through an AI process platform, which is essentially, we're talking about technology empowered, technology embedded services, right? Is how we deliver that outcome. We take the full accountability for it. That's the difference. And in those days, it was the internet. Like, you had these companies that were creating anything .com, and so there was a lot of hype. And anytime Wall Street and the bankers see these type of opportunities, they jump on it. And what happened with us is we had, if I was to, and remember, I was one of the more junior staff members in those early days, so I wasn't necessarily privy to the strategy conversations that our founders were having around the IPO. But what I can tell you is, one, we had the most amazing venture capital firm that had backed us, which is Kleiner Perkins, the legendary Kleiner Perkins. And it was John Doerr himself who was on our board. And I believe that John's advice to our founders is what engineered what was a late stage IPO in those days. December 99 was really like the
Yeah.
last minute of taking advantage of this hype that was happening for a number of years. So we had held out as long as we needed to get our valuation up. The other thing that was interesting about our IPO is we initially had Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley both like trying to get our business, trying to get the IPO. And we wanted them to do it jointly. Like our founder, Glenn, he's too, typical.
Oh,
Can you hear me? I can hear you
yeah,
now. Yeah.
yeah,
All right.
awesome.
I'm sorry, man. The Wi-Fi went out in the area here, so just have to
It's
wait.
okay. Last week it was on. I know you're on the West Coast. On the East Coast, it was pretty bad as well. There's definitely some issues happening in the telecom space.
Yeah, the infrastructure that everything runs on, from airplanes to telecom, needs a lot of updating.
Yeah, it's a big,
Yeah.
big opportunity. But you were talking about how you were basically on the last ticket, and Goldman was competing with.
Yeah, so we had Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs bidding for our business, and our founder Glenn, typical entrepreneur, you know, always asking the question why. So he basically went to Morgan Stanley and said, "Why do I have to pick? Why can't I have both of you take us to IPO?" And Morgan thought about it and came back and said, "You know what? We'll do that, right? We're happy to do that." Um, if Goldman are. When we went to Goldman, they weren't having it. They're like, nope, we've only ever had to do it once before in our history with Morgan, and never again. But no, it's either us or them. Like, you need to pick. And for whatever reason, Goldman was the choice. So we picked Goldman. And as they're taking us to preparing us for IPO, you're making all these disclosures, right? When you go through that process, it's quite a vigorous process. The SEC goes back in time and just basically, from the beginning of when you started your company, they scrutinize everything, right? And anything that doesn't look right is investigated and either needs to be corrected or could actually block you from going public. So in our case, everything looked fine. Dates were set for sometime that year in the fall, and all of a sudden the SEC comes back and says, "Hang on a second, um, your largest customer is holds $10 million of warrants in your company." And we're like, "Yeah, when we made the long-term deal, that's what they wanted. They wanted $10 million of warrants, and in return, they gave us a long-term deal." And that was kind of the way we've disclosed it. There's nothing here that we haven't disclosed. And they're like, "Well, no, 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 no." So they're like, "You cannot disclose that the revenue coming in from that client as revenue when they hold that many warrants. Like, it's classified differently. So you got to go restate your numbers, and your
Oh,
numbers are not as strong because it was our largest customer, right?"
wow.
And it was a screw up, of huge significance on our advisor's part, on Goldman's part, right? And so what I remember is when 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 that all came out, and Goldman said, "All right, we got to go and restate these numbers, and we got to do this, and what are our options?" And that's when Glenn jumped on it and said, "All right, you either co sponsor this with Morgan Stanley, or I'm firing you and I'm going with Morgan Stanley because you've screwed us up and delayed our IPO." And it really looked like our IPO was going to go into 2000, and none of us wanted that because we knew the bubble was going to burst. It was one of those moments where late 1999, the smart money was starting to pull back, right? And the market was overheated, and there was a lot of businesses. Anything .com was not a real business, yet they were getting these crazy valuations and they were raising capital on just ridiculous valuations. And we did too, to be honest. When on IPO day, when we opened up, 10x where our IPO number strike price was, and where we ended the day was a 10 billion valuation. And today, when I say 10 billion, most of your listeners are like, that's pretty good, but it's 10 billion. It's not much. In those days, 10 billion was
Yeah.
like, it was like the $1 trillion number today. I mean, on IPO day, we were worth more than General Motors, Citicorp, and one other company that they kept referring to, all put together. Three of them together were not valued 10 billion in those days. Like, think about that, right? So we had a really great coming out party to the public markets, but like I said, we were just the way we were led. I have so much respect for the leadership of that company. We were told we celebrated our success. Don't get me wrong. Everyone's got egos, but we were basically led to put our heads down and focus on serving our clients and just working and building and growing and doing all the things that our original mission had us doing, which, just because we IPO'd didn't mean we had arrived. Like, we still had a lot to do. And so really credit those guys for the way they led us through that. And so while we were paper millionaires for 6 months, after that, we just went back to being hardworking, startup guys. And for me personally, I never sold a single share in the company until 2010, when Ariba was sold to SAP for $5.5 billion. And at that point, I said, "All right, I'm done. I'm going to take my money and go do something else." And so it was like a 15-year run for me, as far as holding on to the equity and holding on to what I believed was a great company that was not valued where it should be. It took 15 years. And then when SAP saw the value in us and acquired us, I'd already left the company at that point, by the way. But from the sidelines, I was cheerleading, and from the sidelines, I was able to cash out. So that's how that all came about.
How did that whole process, knowing that you were a paper millionaire and knowing that you had all of this momentum on your side as a young person too, how did it affect your relationships with family or with potential girlfriends, or like how did you have to
Great
how did you
question.
do that?
Great question. Two buckets to that question. Two different buckets to answer. One is, like, my family is very interesting in that my dad chose to give my brother and I the opportunity of growing up and being educated in the West, as opposed to in what he considered to be an extreme fundamentalist country, right? So the trade-off for that was we grew up poor. My dad had to start all over again, in a new country twice. First the UK, then Belgium. And the gist of it is that we struggled, and growing up, we had a roof over our heads, we had food on our plates, but that was it. Like, we were always very conscious of the fact that we were a struggling, I would call us a struggling lower middle class family. As a result, my family, my immediate family is very, very tight. So when uh, when we had our IPO, and when I showed my parents that same weekend, we IPO'd on a Friday. So we celebrated with my colleagues on the Friday night, and then on Saturday, I ran home to proudly show my parents where I was. They were nothing but elated. Like, they just thought, this is amazing. And I did outline to them that we can't do anything for another 6 months. I mean, had everything stayed the way it was 6 months later, I think I would have been able to, like, impact my parents' life, my own life, in a very different way. Instead, it didn't happen. So I was always brought up to, like, not count your chickens until the eggs have hatched, right? So yeah, it didn't really disrupt the family relationship. And to this day, like, my family is so happy and excited for the successes I'm having here. They're still back in Europe, and they do their thing. They live their lifestyle, and I do mine, but we're very close, right? The interesting thing is the friends and the relationships there. When I think about it, a lot of the folks that I was friends with and I'd come up with in college and university. And I played 10 years of semi-pro American football in Europe.
Wow.
So I had a lot of good friends that, you know, we played and worked out all year round. A lot of them didn't know how to handle that. Like, one friend in particular, like, really, like, lost his mind over his lack of success and his lack of opportunity. And he wasn't wrong. Like, there was, he was, you know, he really just had a bad run of, like, lack of opportunity for a guy that was super educated, super intelligent, a guy that I really thought was going to be very successful. He struggled. And so some of my friendships, they didn't end, but they were definitely damaged quite a bit by early success. And that's, you know, I don't know, today, like, kids wear being an entrepreneur like it's a badge of honor. And the ones that do see success, it's usually in the form of, look, I just raised a bunch of money from VCs, and they don't necessarily realize that that's not success. Success is when you truly create a business that is worth so much more than what you've put into it, whether it's your investors, whether it's you, and you come out of it with, you know, having established something that is making the world a better place. Most recently, like, the best example of that in my mind is, you know, it's either OpenAI or Palantir. Those are two businesses that, um, you know, Palantir's been at it for a long time, but they took an idea, a concept, a thesis
Yeah.
20 plus years ago, and they slowly built an amazing business that then eventually IPO'd and is now being recognized for the true value that it delivers, right? And then OpenAI speaks for itself. I mean, the speed at which they've done what they've done is phenomenal. So that's success to me. Not I just raised 100 million on, you know, a billion valuation. Look at me, I'm successful. You're not. All you did was raise a bunch of capital, and most likely, you know, if you don't succeed, you've just made a few people maybe wealthy, but not yourself.
Yeah. And you probably created more value destruction because of that, because you weren't able to
Exactly. Exactly.
propagate it forward.
It takes, listen, the best thing I can tell you from my experience, having joined a startup that was basically an unproven thesis, right? And going all the way through the journey of building a real business, surviving the crash, having an IPO, selling ourselves once, and I stayed on with that company, and then selling ourselves finally to SAP, the ultimate exit, right? Um, what I learned from that is it's really hard to build viable businesses. It's really difficult. Like, and the level of difficulty, it's relative, but it's the same whether you're building a small retail business that you own all out, or whether you're building a startup like many of our portfolio companies are, right? It's a very difficult thing to do because you have to shift. You have to shift all the time. We're going through it right now at zero. We spent 2 years establishing our business and assembling the right pieces to essentially help us with the vision and the thesis that we have. We've had to shift in the last several weeks big time because guess what? We are on a fast growth trajectory. We've got enterprise clients now, which is for an early, 2-year-old startup to have enterprise customers is very unusual and very challenging, but also a hell of an accomplishment, right? So that's another shift in everything from how you resource to the way that you need to kind of go from firefighting and reacting to your customers, that the small customers that you build with, to now I got a plan. Right now I'm dealing with an $11 billion client that needs planning, it needs process, it needs documentation. um, you have to comply by a whole bunch of rules that come with enterprise customers that you don't have when you're serving a bunch of startups or a bunch of smaller companies, right? So it's an amazing amazing challenge going through the different processes. And not everybody, not everybody can do that. I mean, it's amazing. We all know who the founder-led success stories are, right? Whether you look at Zuck at Meta, or you look at some of the, like, the guys that have built businesses just in the last several years. Companies like Stripe
Yeah.
are still founder-led, right? And it's amazing. It's rare. It's not typical that a founder is going to go from startup to establishing a viable multi-billion-dollar business. Like, it's just not. And I mean, even in the early days of Zuckerberg, I'm old enough to remember when he turned down the 1.5 billion or whatever it was from Microsoft at the time to buy the Facebook. And we all thought he was insane. Like, the world thought he was nuts, and yet he stuck with it. And then the way that he just managed the whole thing through IPO, when you're sitting on the sideline and you're being a critique of that, it was very easy to, like, point to his lack of experience, right? And asking, like, who's advising this guy? Like, he's the way that he's turning a 1.5 billion dollar offer from Microsoft for his website is stupid. Like, what are you doing? Or when he was, insisted on creating a separate class of shares when they were preparing for IPO. And if it wasn't for Peter Thiel in his corner, I'm not sure he would have ever pulled that off, right? So this lack of experience. But then look at him today. Like, I have nothing but respect for Mark Zuckerberg today. Like, I don't know the guy, have very limited interactions with him, although we share a board member with his company, which is phenomenal. But I don't know him. I wouldn't pretend to know him. All I know is I've admired how he has shifted gears throughout the years, right? Some
Yeah.
of it reflects his inexperience, but a lot of it is just doing the right thing for your business. Your business is going to evolve. Your business is going to grow. Your customers are the market's going to change. It's going to shift. And this guy keeps shifting. Like, you got to give him full credit. But it's unusual. Like, the average entrepreneur is going to take their business to a certain point and then hand that baton off to people that can then take it to the next level, right? That's typically what happens. And it's very hard to build these businesses. I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs that do.
What's one word of advice you'd give to somebody who might be an immigrant or, new in the country and wants to change their circumstances?
Oh, wow. One word, huh? Um, can I give 2 words?
You can do as much as you want. I just know you're short on time as well, so I'm watching the clock for you.
Never surrender. That's what I would tell anybody in this country, whether it's an immigrant or whether it's somebody who was born and raised here, whether it's somebody that right now is facing very difficult circumstances, be it financial or otherwise, or whether you're someone who's extremely successful, and is kind of wondering what's next, because I've seen that a lot, right?
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. You never give up. You just never quit. Like, that's just something. If I could teach that to people, you never quit. It's the one thing I've been very successful at teaching my young kids, right? Uh, my kids are everything. And I adopted my kids when they were 11 and 12 years old. So I didn't raise them from birth, and was not able to form their early thinking, which is huge. But I can tell you, the one thing they've learned from me, and they use it every day, is you never ever give up. You never surrender, right? And I just believe that, like, when it comes to your dreams, when it comes to whatever it is that you want to do, this country provides you with the opportunities. This country is set up to allow the individual to flourish. I haven't seen that anywhere else in the world. I've been to 140 plus countries around the world, right? I've lived in many, and I've spent a lot of time in others, and I have not seen this level of opportunity and freedom that we have in the United States for an individual to rise and be successful. So yeah, that's my advice: is never give up.
Phenomenal. Thanks for coming on. This was
You
great.
bet. Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.